Okay, so introduction first, before I get started on the actual content of the webinar. Just to introduce ourselves to you. Our name is Etteplan, is the company that I represent. We are specialists in providing engineering and technical documentation solutions and services. So that basically means that 2,100 designers, of which 400 documentation specialists, either create, manage, and publish the documentation for our customers. We help with the engineering, we help with the testing as well, plant engineering. There's a whole list of services that we can do. Offices in Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, in the US, we're in Austin, Texas, and 3 offices, about 220 people work in our Chinese offices. Publicly listed firm. Our revenue last year was close to 132 million euro, and we are listed on the Nasdaq OMX Helsinki under the ETT 1V ticker, in case you want to have more information on that. We are working for quite a number of different customers representing different industries, aerospace, defense, medical, household equipment, financial, you name it. In essence, this means that a lot of these customers have a technical documentation requirement, and then they ask us to either outsource some, if not all, of the aspects, and so that we can help them out there. So all of this is based on the requirements for technical documentation. So we're looking at safety and regulations, and one of these safety regulations aspects I'll discuss in a moment with S1000D. But of course, cost savings, we need to be able to provide high quality documents at a low cost that is going to allow for quick and easy maintenance in case our products require us to do so. Smart shipping, so that your product can be shipped with the documentation as soon as a product is ready for shipment. And of course, the documentation also needs to be future-proof. So, and I'll discuss some of these aspects during today's webinar. Brief list of who we are, what we do as far as what we do. Technical documentation services, we help with getting you these types of deliverables. But on the engineering side, on the tech doc side, more consultancy and analysis. Asset information is something that we can help with as service information as well. On the engineering, I mentioned already briefly, plant engineering, testing, helping you in essence as Etteplan with the full product life cycle from start till the product goes into retirement. Jim is asking if the sharing is available. Just let me make sure that we have my screen available. Oh, there we go. There were some technical difficulties there. See, so it's a good thing that you asked, Jim. Thank you. So briefly, an overview of Etteplan. Again, the overview of the customers. As I mentioned to you, I'll briefly go through this. The requirements for technical documentation and our fields of expertise. Again, there's a recording of this webinar. You can ask me also for the slides afterwards, no problem. Very briefly, before we get started here, our flexible offering, we have companies ask us to either provide the people and their skills in order to do technical documentation, so the creation, management, and publication of technical documentation locally. So we would basically add capacity during peak hours, and we would take away people during off-peak hours to implementing tools as part of a content strategy. So HyperSte, the use of Simplified English, HyperDoc, content management, etc., etc. I'll discuss that briefly later on. To the full outsourcing to part of or the part of the tech doc function or literally everything, where we also utilize our Chinese offices in order to create the same quality against a lower cost. So today's webinar topic, STE, Simplified English, as part of an S1000D or ATA ISpec 2200 implementation. What does this entail? Well, a quick introduction about S1000D to those of you who are not familiar with this. It's an international specification designed to cover the activities in support of a platform. And this is platform, air, sea, land vehicles, mainly, of course, in the defense and aerospace industries. Currently, the specification is at 4.1, the issue, and 3,513 pages. If you go to s1000d.org, you can actually download a free copy of the specification, but you could probably understand that having over 3,500 pages means that it can be quite complex, which of course also has to do with the fact that the equipment, the platforms, the systems that it needs to support are usually also quite complex. Companies like Airbus, Boeing, Mitsubishi Regional Jet, Comac in China, Irkut in Russia, and many other OEMs have selected S1000D as the specification to use for delivering technical documentation. In essence, it means single sourcing, right? So writing content once, then reusing it over again. You can imagine that an aircraft has a manual that is not a quick guide, that has only 2 pages. These are usually very large manuals, and specifically in order to facilitate the maintenance tasks of field service engineers, tens of thousands of field service engineers worldwide, it is much easier and faster to, you need to basically make it much easier and faster to retrieve information, and also allow for publication formats to be multiple, whether you publish PDF files or an interactive electronic manual on your laptop or iPad, or simply make the exchange of this data easier make data easier to exchange. And that's why a specification like S1000D is around to facilitate that. ATA ISpec 2200 in essence does the same. It's an information standard for aviation maintenance. It's recommended specs for the content, structure, and deliverables to meet the requirements of aircraft technical information, of which the objectives are to minimize the cost and the effort, used when something like that is used by operators and manufacturers, to improve the information quality and timeliness, and to make sure that manufacturers provide data that meets the operational needs of the airlines. So usually there is an S1000D, or within an S1000D or ATA ISpec 2200 requirement, there usually is an STE requirement. What does that mean? Well, ASD ST100 is a specification just like S1000D. It actually comes from the same body that S1000D was published by, which is the European ASD, the aerospace and defense industries of Europe, which means that the language that you write your manuals in need to conform with the writing rules and vocabulary of ASD Simplified Technical English. Already getting a question there, Colin. I will answer this in the end, if you don't mind. So the business rule is something that you need to look closely at. So if you have an S1000D or an ATA ISpec 2200 requirement, you need to look very closely whether there is also an STE requirement. Usually there is. So what does that mean if there is a requirement? Well, if you do not deliver STE, then you have the inability to deliver the required technical documentation, and preference may be given to your competitors in case you are bidding for an S1000D project. You may not be qualifying for tender opportunities, and you may even lose your supplier status. With compliant data, however, you can further optimize the delivery of your technical documentation. You can maintain your compliance as a supplier, even access new industries, because S1000D is actually really going into other industries as well. I'm talking about the railway industry, where it's now being called rail decks. I'm talking about the shipping industry, where it's now called ship decks, etc., etc. And in those industries, you will maybe be one of the first to market there. So what is STE then? Well, I mentioned it's an official specification. S1000D is at issue 4.1. STE is actually at issue 6. It was created in the 80s, back in the 80s, by the STE MG, which MG stands for Maintenance Group, which has companies all over the world participating. Companies like Boeing, Airbus, and others as well. There's some airlines in there as well, worldwide. So companies from different industries, from different countries are part of the maintenance group. The goal is to make technical English easy to understand. Easy to understand by a global audience whose English may not be their mother tongue. That is very important to understand, because we can write technical English that is easy to understand by us as engineers or as authors, but it's not about us. It's about the end users. And how do we get there? Well, there's writing rules. The writing rules, there's about 60 of them that are aimed at keeping things simple, also to be specific and to be consistent. So if we're going to call something an aircraft on page 1, we cannot call it something else, like an airplane on page number 2. So we need to be very consistent. And as we know, there's many components and parts in an aircraft or a land vehicle or a sea vehicle. We need to be very consistent with how we, which words we use. So we cannot use one word with multiple meanings, nor can we use multiple words that have the same meaning. Be specific, I mentioned. So if we're going to say make sure that the pressure is okay, well then we are being vague. We need to be very specific there. Do not stack these boxes too high. Well, what is high? 2 boxes, 9 boxes. If they're 200 pounds per piece, you may want to tell your end user. So, and we need to basically, on top of the writing rules, we also need to standardize on our own terminology. Core dictionary has about 3,000 words, but they are English generic words. They do not contain any company specific words. A word like wing or helicopter is not even part of the specification, and that means we need to, on top of the STE core dictionary, we need to add our company dictionary and standardize those words where we adhere to the main rule, which is that one word can only have one meaning, or one word can only be one part of speech. So if we're going to call something switch as a technical noun, we can no longer use switch as a technical verb, because if you say you need to switch the switch, that will cause confusion. What does it address then? Well, information in the last couple of decades is becoming more and more complex. It's also becoming larger in volume. So maintenance information is getting extended. We are now, the more complex our products become, the more complex and lengthier our maintenance information becomes as well. We're servicing a global market. That means that our service centers are no longer locally located, but also geographically separated from each other. That means that our audience worldwide are mainly non-native English speakers. They may even not have the same experience levels as they would locally. There's various levels of technical skills. There's risks of misunderstandings, therefore. Someone at Airbus in the 80s electrocuted himself because the manual read he needed to cut the power. So this person grabbed a pair of scissors and did so. Silly, of course, but that's what the manual stated. Liability, therefore, for fault or incomplete information. And we are also required to have much shorter response time. So we need to make sure that the information at hand is being given, is being retrieved very quickly, and cannot be misunderstood, so that people can do their jobs as efficient as possible. The International Civil Aviation Association came up with the statement that standardization of language used by maintenance personnel has become increasingly necessary because of substantial changes in maintenance practices in the past 20 years, including the expansion of roles of computers, fewer translations of documents from English to other languages, increased use of manufacturer standardized training material, more alliances amongst airlines. You know, there used to be 15 different airlines a couple of years ago in the US. There's only 3 or 4 right now, if we take the bulk. And then there's an increasingly mobile, multicultural workforce at hand as well. And we need to adhere to that. Now, if we then provide them with an English language for the purpose of maintenance issues, for instance, well, we have to be aware that the English language has over 1 million words. Words like set, run, go, take, and stand individually have over 334 different definitions. The word set actually has 446 definitions. Well, then you can see why, it's quite a simple word, right? So if you use that word in multiple occasions with multiple meanings, how that can maybe confuse your end users. For instance, if I take this sentence, turn off engines not required, I always use this sentence if you have seen my past webinars. Well, the problem with that is, see, the problem number one is that it's a perfect English sentence. Turn off engines, not required. However, from a native or non-native English point of view, it could mean turn off the engines that are not required. But it could also mean turn off the engines not required, meaning turning off the engines is not required at all. And if you have, for instance, an A380 where you have the choice of 4 engines, well, this could mean a very big difference in what you have to do or not do with these engines. That can lead to, of course, very dangerous situations. Some of these examples, how the worst maintenance fails could have been prevented in the aircraft industry. In 2009, a helicopter crashed. The report blamed the mechanical problems on failed maintenance. Japan Airlines took off with a virtual stabilizer and crashed 32 minutes later. Maintenance issues. 2005, there was an incident, as you can read right here. 2000, 1988, etc., etc. You can read through these, but they basically mean is that small things can have very big consequences. The source was the Aviation Institute of Maintenance in this case. Other examples, how small errors can have very big consequences, is that a power transformer company, because this is not just aerospace and defense, of course. This company got sued for $5 million because a transformer blew up due to bad documentation. Google, if we take the word Google itself, it's being used in every single language and we're not requiring a translation. If you talk about Google in Japan, people in Japan will say the word Google. They'll do the same in China, in Arabic countries, in Europe, as well as in the US. However, if we look at the language translation issues they have encountered online, 35% of them were reported as problems with translations. Basically, you can see which other examples are being mentioned here. Small things can have very big consequences. We need to be aware of that. So, what do we need to ask ourselves? Well, do we communicate clearly and efficiently? Do we have terminology management? Are we writing according to a style guide? And if we have terminology and if we have a style guide, well, how do we measure the quality? In other words, are we efficient and cost-effective information developers? And the reason why I say information developers, is because it's not always authors that write the content. It's sometimes, or actually in a lot of cases, it's engineers that write certain content as well. Excuse me for taking a sip of my tea. So we have you as an author writing content for different end users. The author may be of a different language, a different cultural, and a different technical background, where your end users may also be of a different language, different cultural, or different technical background. We need to adhere to that. So if we then manage and publish our content, right, if we have that sentence here, turn off the engines that are not required, well, there's actually a lot of different ways of saying that. Trying to say the exact same thing, but using very different words. By the way, if you're going to put this in your translation memory, you'll get billed a lot for this because you're using different words. So translation memory doesn't necessarily only look at the meaning, they look at which words you have been using. However, if we're just looking at that, just having this one unambiguous sentence going into your content management system, whether it needs to meet the requirement of S1000D, ATA, or DITA for that matter, whether it requires translations, whether it needs to have multiple outputs to our end users. Your end user, this guy right here, is not going to care whether you have a content management system. He needs to be getting to the information very quickly so that he can read and understand very clearly what he or she needs to do at that particular moment in time. So he doesn't care whether you have a CMS or a Word with S1000D. That's all he cares about, getting to the information quickly and understanding it fine. So if you have a lot of ambiguous content right here, that makes a difference for this particular person. So having STE being part of your content management environment, that actually means is that it will facilitate the entire content management process for that matter. How do we implement then Simplified English? Well, number one, it is very important that your authors receive training. Because you can provide them with software that I mentioned as step number 3, but people need to be aware of how to write and clear and unambiguous at first. Software is there to check your work, which is great. However, software is not there to let you know what is needed or what is not needed to know by your end user. That is the job of an author. So training in that regard is very important. People need to not only see how they need to write in simplified English, they also need to understand why it is necessary to do so. Only if they understand the why, they are able to really write in a lot better way and also much more concise. Number two steps is to standardize your terminology. I mentioned it already earlier. The specification requires you to add company standardized terms on top of the ASD STE 100 dictionary. So that means is that the words like wind or helicopter or engine or any, even what I'm knocking on right now, a word like table or chair or door, those are words that are not part of the specification, and you need to standardize on that. We once saw with a medical equipment, an MRI scanner, that they used 20 different names to describe the table that the patient lies on before going into an MRI scanner. It was called patient table, it was called support system, it was called treatment table, couch. Even in certain cases they had 20 different words to describe the same thing, and that can of course cause confusion. The checking part is what software does. The software provides quality assurance, quality control, because we're all humans. We can write in STE, and I've been writing STE myself for 15 years now, and the software will still point out some errors to me because I may overlook them. It will also allow you then to increase or decrease rather your time to market, so you'll be able to write a lot faster. Also because you're sticking with the need to know versus the nice to know, which means that you will be able to reduce your content by 30% just as a result of the training for that matter. So it's a 2 to 3 day training course that we can help you get to your end users, or I'm sorry, to your authors, learn how and write to write with a global audience. Standardize your corporate terminology. So one word, one meaning. It's a service that we offer, meaning that we will mine your data. So we will ask you for a cross-section of your manuals. It doesn't have to be all your manuals, as long as they are a fair representation of the terminology that you use. We will then extract the terms. We will do a linguistic and statistical analysis. And then the end result is a company dictionary, corporate dictionary, with both approved and non-approved words. So whenever people then write non-approved words, HyperSte, the checker tool, will then guide you to the approved form, synonym. Speaking of which, HyperSte is our leading checker software for content quality. I mentioned the 400 writers that we have in our offices, where they all use HyperSte to write content for our customers. It's in addition to that, it's being used by many companies worldwide in the aerospace and defense industries, but also very much outside of those industries. As I've seen, some of you are not all from aerospace and defense worlds. It's a checker tool. That means it sits on top of your authoring environment. So we have a plugin for Word, FrameMaker, ArborText, XMetal, InDesign, Xmax, which is the the integrated version in the CMS for XMetal, Madcap Flare, integrations in Oxygen and AuthorIt, and we also provide standalone version and HyperSte generic that you could simply use to copy paste or import PDF files, for instance, to run checks. The benefits, number one, of course, is getting rid of non-ambiguous content. So safety. Number two, you now comply with ASD ST 100, the specification that is being required to use as per your S1000D or ATA ISpec 2200 specification. It's a standardized way of writing, which means that it can bring more efficiency to the authoring process. It helps to meet delivery deadlines because, as I mentioned, the content is on average reduced by 30%. It will improve your user experience. Your global audience will much easier understand, much quicker understand what they're writing and doing in order to perform maintenance tasks, as an example. It can bring documentation and translation costs down and prevent costs from happening in the first place because, well, preventive maintenance, let's just call it that way. Before and after example. So in this case, the before and after example, the result was reduced by 35%, but I would almost say more, if not equally important, the instructions are now a lot clearer. There's much more consistency in the words, which means that in this case it needed to be translated. It was the reduction in translations was about 40%. The FAA also mentioned here that if their manuals are ambiguous, we are at risk, which is the reason why they are using HyperSte. Quick example of the before and after. So the before is using a lot of text with a lot of photos. By the way, we recommend to not use photos. The benefit of using photos is that you can take them quick and they're very easy to copy and paste in your Word and Microsoft Word manuals, right? But if you are going to print these out, which usually is what your end users do, a lot of the information in the manuals is regarded as, number one, redundant. Number two, a lot of the information is no longer visible because, well, there's some very dark aspects in here. So it's much better and easier to actually use illustrations, which take in the beginning a little bit more time to create. But if you look at the after example, you can see what I mean here. There's only 3 illustrations needed, and it tells us in Simplified English, this part was actually reduced by 30%, the text. We added this to translation memory, where just by having this text in translation memory, 20% was recovered as perfect matches, which was an increase of 15% if we looked at the before results. So it can really help save cost there. Now, a quick demonstration on how it works, and mainly also how to deal with legacy data if you have that simplified English requirement. Oh, that's our brochure. That's for later. I'm just going to open it up in FrameMaker here. I mentioned our BeText Editor. That's a checker that we help out with as well. But if I check this page, so there's 2 types of checks with HyperSte. I check this page and I get some feedback. The feedback is given in colors. Every color stands for a different error message. And in this case, the word acceptable is not acceptable because it can have 3 different meanings. In case I do permitted here, which is the better word, then I make these changes, as you can see. So it does a word-by-word replacement, but it will also put words, if there are multiple ones, in the correct order. Warnings, in this case, I'm being told that a warning is not correct here because I need to start a warning with a simple and clear command. So the housing can be hot is not a command. I'll give you an example at home with the kids. If you tell a kid, hey, the oven stove can be hot, well, what will the kid do? You know, put his hand on it, see how hot. Tell someone, hey, warning, do not touch the oven stove because it can be hot. And that makes a lot of difference. And I mentioned children here, but really in reality the same really applies to adults. Challenge someone and they will do it rather than first telling them not to do it. And then explain why. Words like should, may, could are not allowed because if you tell someone that they should turn off the power, they actually have a choice. Specifically in the some of the Asian cultures, for instance, you're giving people a choice to either do it or not to do it. And if you, in the US, for instance, you should, it basically means shall, which means must. And in other cultures, it can actually mean you can either do it yes or no. It's kind of up to you. There's another tool that we have here that we introduced a little while ago. That's the sentence database. So if I, for instance, click on the word higher up here, then HyperSte is looking for sentences that are similar but also have a high compliance rating, which is what CR stands for. If I see that one of my colleague writers already rewrote this sentence, I can then select that sentence and do a full replacement. And this sentence is now 100% compliant, 100% being reused. If you do not have a content management system, this is great news because it's like using the ability of content management without actually having a content management system in place. This can really help save time on writing. As you can see right here, I'm now in the dictionary of TELABS, which is a telecommunication firm. So that's the standardized dictionary here. HyperSte is very flexible, so if you do not have an ASD ST100 requirement, we allow you to change the rules to meet your controlled authoring needs. You have all of that here. You can change some of these rules as well if needed. You can create different profiles for this. Well, there's already by default descriptive text, procedural text, terminology check text profiles, checks. so that whenever you are needing to, let's say in S1000D you have a certain tag that can only contain procedural text, well, now you can actually make sure that people are only using procedural text for that. So it facilitates S1000D in that regard. But you can create profiles for marketing, for legal, for any type of content that you want to have checked for and against. It's a pretty easy setup from an IT point of view. So you have you don't need an MSQL server or a cloud or anything like that. You simply put the dictionary and sentence database files on a shared drive, and then the setup really shouldn't take more than 5 minutes in that regard. So from an IT point of view, pretty easy to set up. I can even export the marked up text to an HTML file so that you can educate your colleagues or competitors, or, well, of course not competitors, but your colleagues or your suppliers on what it is they are doing right or wrong. It's very easy, or very good, very professional to use if you are very efficient to use if you're using someone in engineering. That way, if they are creating some content, you can send this back to them like, this is not me telling you that you're wrong. This is the specification, and this is with the explanation why you're doing it the incorrect way. So, lastly, you can create reports. So if I just create a report for this particular file, then it will open it up in my internet browser. It will tell me that I have a compliance rating of 75%, which is pretty good. Normally you want to go towards 90%. We also give you readings for readability, Flash Kincaid grade, so US school grade level reading, which is in the US Army quite important. Document translatability, similarity, and get all your scores right here. Also some document statistics. And on the right, we get some weighted error classes and get some information here. If I see there's a lot of blue, it means that I'm doing quite badly on non-approved words, but I want to go to the detailed results. So I guess one step back here, you can create a report on one file. You can also create reports on multiple files. So if you create, you can take the entire book, for instance, in FrameMaker, but you can also do it in BeText, let's say, for a whole bunch of XML files, a whole bunch of topics, for instance, if you're really going in detail. And then per document, you can get per file, you can get your rating on how you're doing with terminology or grammar or length and style and structure. And if you want to get more information, you go to this drop-down box, and it tells me for non-approved words, you can put in an alphabetical or in a frequency order for that matter. See the words, see how many times they were used, see their approved synonyms, how they were used in context, and take it from there. Which is really good to use when you have legacy data that needs to get converted to simplified English, because you may not have the time to rewrite everything. So what you would do is before an implement, or right after you have implemented the software, you would create a report on one or on multiple files. You would see what the main problem areas are, and you would then go back into HyperSte and create profiles that, for instance, would be a phase 1 profile. Phase 1 profile would use, you can set up, or we help you usually do that whenever we help out our customers, help create profiles, help create milestones. For instance, set up a phase 1 where only the top 10 error messages are being dealt with. So we can unflag all the other rules, we can call it a phase 1 profile, and we can then start making these changes. That way you will get much faster and easier. It's a very efficient conversion process to become STE, and it's much faster because in case you have, let's say, a translation requirement next week, but you do not have time to rewrite everything, you can already go ahead and start taking the big errors out of this, so that you may not be ready with STE compliance, but at least you help start saving your company some translation costs there. So, and that's how the conversion can help, and then you can after that create a phase 2, a phase 3 per month, set a compliance rating level. We start with 20% usually. We then go to 35%. The month after that, it needs to be at least 50%, etc., etc. We can help you set all of that up. The parameters, as you can see right here, are also being given. We give you an example of all the writing, or an example actually printout of all the writing rules, which colors, the explanation and everything else. You see weight over here. Well, it's an important feature because with weights we allow you to actually see like a warning. For instance, it's important that our writers write warnings in a certain way, and if they don't write it in a certain way, we should have the ability to penalize them for it. And what I mean with that is, if I go to, for instance, to the use of warnings, which is right here, we see that it's now being given the weight of 5. Well, if we make it 10, use 0 to 10, that means that the compliance rating will automatically go down if I don't adhere to these rules. So you can actually, from a safety point of view, make sure that some of these writing rules are seen more stricter than other writing rules, because it's important from a safety aspect that people write a certain way. Okay, so that is as far as that is concerned. We will continue now. And again, ask me any questions and I will answer them in a moment. If I look at the time, I see that we have another 7 minutes to go. So we did survey results based on companies that are using Simplified Technical English and HyperSte. We saw that translation and localization costs were reduced by 30%. There was a 40% reduction in word count. Quality improvement in writing and translations, up to 30% in reduced product cycle time. That was important for one of our customers who before wrote in Simplified English, but they didn't have an automatic checking process in place. And with the tool, they were able to go down from 4 people in the quality assurance department to only 1 person using the tool. So there was quite a bit of savings there in the cycle time. Rather than doing an incidental check, they were able to just simply check everything using the software. Up to 40% reduction in overall documentation costs, and I just showed you how the conversion of legacy data can be made more efficient to be SDE compliant. Case study on Rolls-Royce. They needed to comply, of course, with ASD ST100, and they also had a requirement to have a better quality and readability of their manuals. Now, this was a survey conducted by Rolls-Royce themselves, so they found out that approximately 81% reduction of grammatical errors were found, 90% reduction of STE errors, approximate 52% reduction in time to find these errors. This was for the writers. For the quality assurance, there was an approximate, well, half of the time was necessary to review content for compliance with STE, and there's a 25% increase in errors that were found using the software in comparison with before. The American Airlines, they needed to standardize their maintenance cards. We helped them create a standardized dictionary for terminology that was set on top of the Airbus and Boeing dictionaries. We trained their authors as well as their engineers, because they were writers as well, on how to create clarity. And then the last part is for Electa, and I believe someone of Electa is available. I think it's you, Yvonne. Hi, in case that's you. And total translation budget in 2011 was 824K with the global information management. So their content strategy at Electa, STE helped them achieve savings of up to 40%. Page counts were reduced by 30%. There was a 20% word count reduction. And they saw an improved user experience what came out of information that caused less confusion, service calls, etc., etc. So that kind of concludes today's webinar. You can contact us at barry.graster@etteplan.com. For more information, you can actually contact me to request a copy of our latest brochure with HyperSte. We're currently, about a week ago, we released issue 6.5. So any HyperSte users out there that have still maintenance contracts, you can upgrade to 6.5. We can also provide you with a free, this is actually a 130-page booklet that explains Simplified English. It gives you an historic overview, explains the rules, etc., etc. We are currently on the 3rd edition of that, and it's complimentary, so it's free. So you can request these free items from us. What we also do for free is we do a free analysis. So you can, after we sign most likely an NDA with you, you can ask us to do an analysis on some of your sample content and see how good or how bad it is, or how it can be further improved. Want to read more about Simplified English in general, feel free to visit simplifiederenglish.com. If you want to learn more about Ediplan and our engineering services, then feel free to visit our website. That being said, I'm going to open up the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now. Questions coming in. One question is, HyperSte conformant to ASD ST100? If so, what is the relationship between S1000D and the writing rules specified by the Simplified English Maintenance Group? Well, number one, yes, HyperSte fully complies with ASD ST100. Actually, it was based on that particular specification, even though it's now being used by a lot of companies outside those industries. The writing rules actually within S1000D, or I'm sorry, within STE, are independent. So whether you have an S1000D requirement or not, if you do not, the writing rules are simply there to allow you to create clear content. That means that S1000D is about structuring the content, not about how to write the content. And STE is more about how to write the content. Even though those two specifications live side by side and are complementary towards another, there is no other relationship between the both of them, as they both deal with different aspects of technical documentation. S1000D with the structure and STE with the actual content of that structure. Is it possible to get an evaluation copy of STE? What is the cost of a single user license? Well, cost is something that I cannot provide online, but feel free to email me and I'll provide you with the details. It is possible to get an evaluation copy. Just ping me at barry.braster@ediplan.com and I'll be happy to give you more details on that as well. Does HyperSte work as an add-on to Microsoft Word? Yes, it does. Shashi, yes, it does. It's compliant with Microsoft Word, Arbitext, FrameMaker, InDesign, XMetal, XMax, AuthorIt, Oxygen, etc., etc. So if you have any wishes based on what your authoring system would be and whether we are able to have a plugin for you, then feel free to again contact me. Sonia is asking whether HyperSte and controlled language can be useful even for documentation in non-dangerous branches like software. Yes, Sonia, absolutely. As a matter of fact, because software is, in comparison to the hardware industry, is newer, you actually have a bigger problem in the software industry, because a lot of the content, a lot of the terms, a lot of the jargon is still being invented on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you say iPad, for instance, then I will tell you that it's no longer, not only by everyone, spelled the correct way. There's sometimes a dash in between there. You know, not all the words are capitalized, even though some of the words or some of the letters should be, etc., etc. So even though they're not dangerous as such, by the way, 80% of documentation for an aircraft actually is software related. Because a wing is a wing, a wheel is a wheel, but what really changes these days is the software of the hardware products that we provide to the market. So there's actually still a dangerous aspect there, but even of certain aspects that are not dangerous, it's even more crucial to standardize in software documentation and software content, because there is a flow of new words being used out there. Dion is asking whether S1000D requires STE more strongly than ATA 2200 does. Not necessarily, Dion. It really depends. It's my experience, and we've done multiple implementations, that STE is usually being required by S1000D. But that also has to do with the fact that STE and S1000D have a stronger relationship, which goes back to 20 years ago. ATA 2200 also has a requirement, but really it's there's not necessarily one being required more than the other. The only thing that you could really do is look at your contract, and the contract means the specification that you and your customers have dealt with, and to basically make sure that what's in the contract, whether you need to deliver S1000D or STE or ATA ISpec 2200 compliant content, yes or no. Any further questions? I think there's a hand raised there by Roger Sines. Yes, Roger, did you have any questions? If you do, feel free to add them to the question box down here. Another question coming in. One aspect of STE always creates confusion, namely the rule do not use present participles of gerunds. Is this rule embraced in HyperSte, and if so, what's the reasoning for this? Well, the problem is with gerunds, right? The problem is gerunds, if you, for instance, say, the way we look at gerunds is that it's not clear who is doing what to whom, and that's exactly an example of a writing rule that one of you is giving. So that means that if you tell, and this is an example that we usually use in training, is let's say that the woman hits the man, not a nice example, but the woman hits the man using a hammer. Who is using the hammer? Who is holding it? It could be the woman, because it could be that the woman hits the man using a hammer, so with a hammer, but it could also be that the woman hits the man who is using a hammer. So in other words, in procedural text, you do not want to deal with gerunds because it's not clear who is doing what to whom. It also implies that you have already taken an action, or that sometimes actions are, are happening by themselves. Opening the door will do this. Well, does that mean that I have to open the door or someone else will? So you want to really be talking in the imperative form. So do this, do that, open the door, switch off the power, or set the power of the machine to the off position, etc., etc. So that's a reason for that. So that means that in headings, however, when you're saying installing the software, it is perfectly fine. You can also say install the software, of course, but really what you want to do is not use the gerund in procedural text and allow it to be used in headings, as an example. Some training details, Shashi, feel free to email me again at barry.braster@theplan.com, and I will be able to send you a paper that discusses exactly what is being done in a training session. And then I'll be able to explain the cost structure there as well. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we are, one last. Roger, for you, have any standards writing organizations such as ASE used STE? Yes, they have. I mean, there's a writing organization in the US called Plain Language that is more for governmental type writing, but it's the Plain Language Writing Act, it's called. And that is actually, see, STE is based on good writing practices. And there is the Chicago Manual of Style, and there is the Plain Language, and you could actually go to simplifiedenglish.com and read more about these specifications. But in essence, they all try to do the same thing, create clarity. So when we talk about STE, in this case, I'm talking about ASD STE 100. But you can also, as an organization like ASE, you can use a standard like STE or Plain Language, for instance, to apply best practice writing for your own industry. And then use it that way. There's ISO also looking at it, there's Oasis, etc., etc. But really, what people a lot of times do is simply, because ASD STE 100 is already a specification, is just, and you can download it for free, by the way, just Google ASD-STE 100. There will be the website coming up. You can request a free copy of the STE specification. It's a couple hundred pages, so it's quite big. However, by reading through it, you will very soon realize that a lot of these writing rules are about best practices, and that really the devil is in the detail with regards to which words you are allowed or not allowed to use. As a matter of fact, what we have seen in doing implementations over the last 15 years is that a lot of companies outside aerospace and defense will use ASD STE 100 as a basis for their own writing rules. That doesn't mean that they are, because they're not aerospace and defense companies, so they don't have to comply. And why would they comply with ASD STE 100? However, they're using it as a basis because they don't want to reinvent the wheel, as a basis for their own writing purposes. Okay. One last question. Is it practical to be a practitioner of STE without using compliant STE software tools? Yes and no. The thing is, you could write simplified English with, after having received training, but in reality, the software can really be an added value for that. Sometimes people argue whether whether you require a software tool, yes or no. My argument would be you require the software tool if it's set up the right way. I mean, HyperSte, our tool, for instance, is set up, it's fully based on ASD ST100. You can then customize it if you're not aerospace and defense. But it really helps with making sure you're writing the correct, you're using the correct terms. As I mentioned, I've been writing STE myself for many years now, and even if I write a document, if I check it with HyperSte, I still get 80-85% compliance, and it's still this 5% in a, let's say, 200-page manual that I just have to go through and make sure that, oh right, of course, this needs to be spelled this way or capitalized that way. All right, I use the word undercarriage where it actually should have been landing gear. So it still has very much of an added value, as the case studies of Rolls-Royce has shown earlier. Is there an evaluation version available who will follow the open STE training? Is a question by Bob Van Thiel. We're actually organizing an open STE training in the office in the Netherlands. That is October the 20th and the 21st on the top of my head. If you want to get more information on that, it's thanks Bob, 20th and the 21st. That's in our office in the Netherlands. It's in Best near Eindhoven. It's the cost is €400 per person. You can send over a technical author for 2 days. They will be trained in writing in simplified English. Evaluation versions will be discussed, but not necessarily being given, and the reason is because there's a little bit more to it than just using the tool. I'll actually explain why. Is if you use HyperSte out of the box with the core dictionary, there's still a lot of words that will not be recognized by HyperSte because those words were not data mined, they were not standardized. So it will always be necessary, whether you use a trial or an evaluation copy, to go through that exercise, if it was just for a couple of pages. Training is given throughout Etteplan offices, so if you require a training in the US, in Sweden or in Finland, we have about 45 offices, 3 in China as well, then feel free to ping me, email me, and I'll let you know about the availability of these training sessions in these specific countries. Okay, now that will round things up. I'm sure you may have more questions here, but we're running out of time here. Feel free to again email me, and again I go to the contact information barry.braster@ediplan.com, or fill out the form on simplifiedenglish.com, or simply contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn or any of these social media tools, and I'll be happy to provide you with any information or answer any questions that you may still have. Leaves me to thank you all very much for your participation, and looking forward to receiving you again in the next webinar. By the way, please go to ediplan.com where you will find a whole list of webinars we will be given. Next month we will be discussing augmented reality as part of technical documentation and the use of visual search. So pretty exciting stuff going on there that you can sign up for, and of course that webinar will be free as well. So again, thank you all for participating, and hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.